Hello and welcome to the Gold Ghost and Guns podcast for January 14th, 2024. My name is Tom Luongo. We have a lot to talk about, and we will because Caitlin Luongo is in the house. It is episode 244, as I said, and let's get to it. Caitlin, how have you been? It's been just way too long since you and I have talked.
Yeah, I think our last episode was April, the financial crisis that wasn't, when you and I agreed, all these naysayers who thought the sky was falling were wrong, and
Yeah.
you had a really profound line, which is that the Fed was stepping up to defend the dollar and not defend European interests anymore.
And I think that's kind of where we are.
Yeah,
And and don't get me wrong, it's like, and it's been a long time since you and I talked. And I know that what you want to do, of course, is like what you usually do when you come on the podcast is you get to interview me, which is
yeah,
always a little weird. But which I also enjoy. Just to say that, and I know that that has been a very controversial take of mine. And
yeah,
but at the same time, I think that when you look at the way Trump has operated since then and the way things have moved since the tariff tantrum, which is basically when you and I spoke last, or right around the aftermath of it. And we'll have a link to that podcast in this one so you guys can review it all and we can do the thing and we can go, and all that. So, but it's been a very interesting 9 months, and an
yeah,
incredibly fascinating 9 months to say the least. So,
yeah.
why don't we start then with wherever you think we should go?
Well, let's start with the Fed. I'm mostly going to stay quiet because I know some things, but I'm really interested in your take because you and I have disagreed on this in the
Sure.
past. You were a big fan of Jay Powell, so let's start with the video that has now had, I just checked, 87 million views. The Fed's, Jay Powell, I'm the
Well,
victim video.
yeah, Jay Powell doing the struggle session.
Yeah.
Right. I think that honestly, this is a struggle session video. And I don't think that, like, I'm not going to say that Powell was comfortable with it because it was clearly obvious he was not comfortable.
Some people said it looked like it was a hostage video.
Yeah, it really was. That's what I mean by a struggle session. He really was in a very, very difficult position. But at the same time, I also noted that I was talking to Dexter White about this morning, and he noted that somebody came back and said, "Hey, man, back off. Don't say anything further from here. Let Luna do her thing. And this is the way this has to play out now." I've been saying for a long, long time that what's clearly on the table is that we have to, in effect, reverse the revolution of 1913, where City of London effectively took over the United States financial system by getting us the Federal Reserve Act, the 16th Amendment, the income tax, and the direct election of senators, which, depending on your point of view, is the second or third or even fourth American Revolution. And what are we in now? The fifth? I'm not really sure, but
Yeah,
depending
no
on your
one's sure.
nomenclature. Yeah,
Right.
I don't think anybody's really sure yet. Exactly. And then I've also said that, when you really stop to think about what the Federal Reserve was originally set up to do, and, we can argue as to whether or not it was ever going to be able to hold together as the thing that it was originally designed to do. Because I think that's what you and I spoke about the last time. That by the time we got to the Banking Act of 1935, the Fed had now become like the entire financial system. And now no longer was it just a backstop
Right.
organization or the commercial paper markets, and now became a backstop for the U.S. Treasury markets. And then, everything that we all complain about in free markets and the, Austro-libertarian complex, or even just the monitors complex, we all look at it and go, that's all wrong, right? And the Fed has now become this kind of central clearinghouse for evil in the world. Aside from the fact that we also have the Bank of England, and we have, the ECB, and we have all these other terrible central banks who are
Right.
also,
Which came to Powell's rescue, right? A whole
well,
bunch of central banks got together and
well, of course
criticized.
they did, because
Yeah.
they're defending the conception of central banking. I don't think they're really defending Jay Powell, because every time Jay Powell goes and sits down with Christine Lagarde, or when push comes to shove, he always just mouths the sovereigntist, effectively the version of sovereigntist line, which is, my job is the dual mandate of full employment and stable prices. He did away with the 2% inflation target at Jackson Hole, which was a big deal. Finally, he didn't
Yep.
have to, that was a huge deal. That was
Yep.
very much anti-globalist in that respect, because that's been the big shibboleth of the post Greenspan era, that we're all just going to have to accept the fact that the central banks are going to inflate 2% a year.
Yeah, and
Uh,
Volcker, by the way, remember how he challenged that,
oh
right?
yeah, that's
Volcker was
true.
no fan of that,
No, he
right?
was not. And neither was
Right.
Powell, right? I mean, Daniel DiMartino Booth made that point in her book that Powell was one of the people, along with Richard Fisher and a couple of others, who were incredibly angry with Bernanke just unilaterally making that Fed policy back in, I think, 2007, 2008. So Powell's, kind of, I would say, less globalist impulses have are well documented within the Fed, right? So not to say that he's also not going to defend the Fed because he's been a Fed
Oh, sure.
employee,
Yeah.
for years. I mean, for,
What, more
for
than, it's
however,
what, 12, 13 years? Yeah.
at
When he
least. I
was,
mean, I
he
think he was
was
a
an
junior member.
Obama
Yeah,
appointee to
yeah, I think
governor, right? Yeah.
right. I think it was a junior member of the FOMC back in either 2008 or whenever it was. So there we are. So he's
I don't
been
think
there.
it was that early. I think it was under Obama. It was
Really?
like
Because I
2012. Was that
was it
right?
that
We'll have to
I'm
check
not,
that.
we'll have to check on that. It's fair enough. I mean, my I made the mistake of thinking the other day that Lael Brainerd was still vice chair of the FOMC. So, like
Yeah, I don't
I
know
don't
what
get
she's
everything.
doing now. She hasn't been heard from
She's
recently.
on. She's not at the Fed.
Oh, well,
Well,
she's definitely not
Jefferson.
at the Fed
Yeah,
because
yeah,
she
yeah.
jumped ship to go to the Biden White House,
Yeah.
and we
So
see how that turned out.
so so Trump has been setting up this. I think he's been setting up this attack on the Fed. He knows he has to undermine anybody's faith in the Fed as an institution, right? This is in outside of our little sector of the world, like where we all like care about monetary policy because it's we're weird and it's a hobby. Or in your case, it's your profession, right? And for me, it's basically a hobby, or that's now part of my profession. But at the end of the day, we're Six Sigmas from the norm in terms of
Yes, for sure.
the way the world views all of this stuff. Trump has to popularize this argument.
And it was so interesting, Tom, too, because
Mm.
when that New York Times story broke before the Jay Powell video came out,
Mm-hmm.
I tweeted out at the time, something's up, because it was clear to me that had been leaked by the Fed.
Right.
And then the video came out a few minutes later,
Right.
which confirmed it. And then that put the Trump administration on defense. And
Right.
you had Jeanine Pirro come out and say, listen, he used the word indictment. We never indicted him.
Right. That's what I was getting at.
All we
Right.
did was send a subpoena because the Fed ignored our information requests. And so the whole thing now was like, whoa, this is.
When does the Fed actually act that way where they're acting defensive? Right. And
Well, no, but they ignore information requests all the time. And now Powell said he may not do his Humphrey Hawkins testimony. That's the one oversight that Congress has over the Fed.
Sure.
And now he's using that as an excuse, apparently. That was one of the headlines today, not to do his Humphrey Hawkins testimony. That's interesting. But where I was going was, it was so interesting, the waves of reaction. The first wave was the financial market people who came out to defend the Fed. And the second wave was that you and I probably saw, was a lot of the Bitcoiners who were like, rah, rah, big print's coming, buy Bitcoin, right? And then the third wave was the next morning is where I was really going. That sort of the populists and the MAGA crowd then jumped on this and said, look, it's the Democrats defending the banks. It's the Democrats defending, the big, powerful establishment. And but then it started to kind of fracture too, right? Because you had like Tillis and Murkowski come out and say, we're not going to let Trump's nominee through until this is all calmed down. And so it's just the waves of reaction were so interesting, because the first wave was it's the finance people who are all online all the time. And, some of us saw that New York Times story and, immediately we're like, uh-oh, something's up. And,
No, it is fascinating, right? When you stop to think about all of that. What I saw mostly was the central banks, rallying around, they all hate Powell because he hasn't given them anything that they want, really. I mean, he's done nothing but he said, oh yeah, if you want swap lines, you got to pay full price for them. He's given them nothing that they've actually wanted over the last 4 years. He raised interest rates and forced them all on the defensive, and then held interest rates high even after the tariffs, which was even worse because it helped Trump cut trade deals all last summer.
It very much did. Yes, I can see that. Yeah.
Weak dollar plus high interest rates meant everybody had to capitulate, right? And there's
Yeah.
Trump out there going, he's got TDS and he hates me and everything else. I'm like, oh, fuck off. Like, seriously, dude. I mean, I'm watching this going, I don't believe a word of this. Powell very calmly goes to Jackson Hole and gets rid of it. And then all out of nowhere, no one had this handicap. There was a nobody's bingo card that Powell was going to come out and scrap the 2% inflation target. All I said going into it was, he usually likes to use Jackson Hole as a way to change, to
reset,
bounce new big policy if he can, right? I didn't know what it was going to be, and then when he did that, I'm like,
yeah. Well, there's something else about Jackson Hole. You know that I live in Wyoming, right? And I'm part of the Jackson Hole conference at Anthony Scaramucci. We got together a few years ago to start that conference. Right. And this year, Vice Chair for Supervision Bowman came and Governor Waller came. Last year, they all got invited, and the general counsel of the Fed apparently disinvited them, right? Tells you who's really in control, right? And so they did not come to the Scaramucci conference. And the funny thing is, Anthony came 3 years ago and said, let's do an anti-Fed kind of crypto conference right in Jackson Hole, right as they're all arriving for, the Jackson Hole symposium. And it's kind of turned into, it's a nice little microcosm of, originally it was sort of the counterculture conference. And then he invited the Fed and the establishment within the Fed, blocked the crypto curious ones from coming. And then a year later, they're there. And they're not just there, they're there for the whole conference.
Nice.
I mean, the magnitude of time that a lot of us got to spend with them was it would surprise a lot of people. But I think it's not an accident that some of the pro-crypto policies have come out since then, right? They have now, I think when we last talked in April, I pointed out that the big anti-crypto policy, which had been voted on by the board 7-0, including, by the way, Bowman and Waller voting for it at the time, because again, and we'll get back to the way that Fed chairs work. Fed chairs kind of dominate, right? That the Fed culturally is an organization that tends to try to get unanimous votes, very different than the other 7 vote organization in, namely the Supreme Court, right, where each one of the justices is very independent. Fed governors have 14-year terms. Supreme Court justices are life terms, but they're both very long, right? So in theory, Fed governors should be independent, but that's not how it's actually been. And so what's interesting is to see the reversal of Waller and Bowman from last year. And when you and I last talked in April, and they had the anti-crypto guidance that was blocking banks from issuing stablecoins. Well, I know we're going to talk about stablecoins in a moment. They finally reversed that in December. And I said, well, that's the thing we needed to wait for. That needed to happen. And they got it reversed. And what's interesting is it was 6-1. So it was voted on 7-0 during the Biden era. And now during the Trump era, it was reversed 6-1.
Yeah, that makes sense, because the Trump administration is pushing so hard for. So in a sense, you can almost argue that what you're saying or what you're implying, and I think it's a very strong argument that you're making, is that the Fed is they're not independent in that respect. Like they had to be anti-crypto because the administration and the dominant and the effect. The government was anti-crypto, like at every level.
The whole government, yeah.
The whole government was anti-crypto. Now all of a sudden, right? Now we can bring in the Elizabeth Warren, and then that shifts with the new administration, and all of a sudden they can actually, go with the flow. So they got
room to move. Yeah,
they have room to maneuver. They can put their finger in the air just like anybody else and go, oh, the winds have shifted. Now we can actually do all these things. And, it's just, so from that perspective, it did not, none of this has surprised me at all, that Trump is making his, I mean, when you say all that, wasn't quite following any of that stuff because I got so many other things that I follow. And so I get to talk to you to get to fill the back of my head with the stuff that I haven't been able to keep up with. So to me, this makes perfect sense that we would see this, that the Fed understands that it's one, going to get reformed whether it likes it or not. That some of its functions are going to be pulled back under Treasury, which even by the last time we spoke back in April, Besson had already made that abundantly clear that he didn't want
Very.
he thought that the Fed should not be in bank regulation and this, that, and everything else. And he also let everybody know that he and Powell have lunch every Monday or breakfast every Monday.
Every week.
And so
yeah.
You can't, you have to think, it's not like they're talking about golf. It's not like they're talking about, the fucking World Cup or anything. They're talking about this stuff, right? So, so Jay, you go out there, you let Trump do his thing. And now, to my point originally is that, and I've been saying this all year, which is in order for Trump to take Fed reform, which at best would be a 5 or 10-90, 5.95, 10-90 issue in Trump's terminology, meaning it's important to 5 to 10% of the population.
Oh, right.
The 90 to 95% of the population. Yeah. He has to turn that into an 80-20.
Yeah.
He's not going to get there in a year, but he can move the needle to 50-50 at this point, right? And by tying it directly to this Taj Mahal thing, because that is
right.
Completely, it's another symbol of everything that he's doing now, pushing on Minnesota and all the government corruption. So, and if you think about it from that perspective, for strategically, I'm now thinking like Trump and thinking strategically, right? That Kash Patel, the minute that Quality Leering Center and all of that hit in the Somali mafia hit the airwaves when Nick Shirley did this thing, Kash Patel 2 days later comes out and says, "Oh yeah, we've been in Minnesota since July investigating all this stuff." So of course, why do you think Nick Shirley shows up at Quality Leering Center? Why do you think he knows exactly where to go? This was
interesting
agenda to. So after the shutdown, after the one big beautiful bill, after this, and this, beginning of the year, this is what we're hitting. This is what we're hitting on now because we're moving into primary season. Now we got to deal with Congress. We got to shame them. We start putting out all the smurfing numbers and everything else. And now, of all of that, where everybody is now completely outraged about how much of our tax money they're spending on this shit. Yeah. Oh, and by the way, we can resurrect the Fed and the Taj Mahal, and the fact that and the Fed's been ignoring Congress and has been ignoring the administration. Fine, we're going to bring everybody in. Hey, has anybody not noticed that Hillary Clinton didn't show up today, but she's getting the referral.
Right.
The contempt referral. Like it's finally happening. So slowly but surely, bit by bit, you start you change the public's perception of all of this, and the Fed is part of it. Because it's an issue that to most people is just completely irrelevant. And you've got to make that a thing. So this is what Trump is very good.
87 people viewed the video. 87 million people viewed the video.
And now all of a sudden it's a big deal. Now it's a big deal.
Yeah, good. Well, we'll see, right? Where does it go from here? So you pointed out correctly how Besson's been very consistent about his views of the whole thing. I can't remember whether you and I talked in April. I think it would have been afterwards, so we probably didn't. When I learned that Treasury was at least looking into the possibility of tokenizing treasuries. And if you think
we did not talk about that.
If you think about the impact of that, what does the Fed do aside from monetary policy and bank regulation? It runs FedWire.
Right.
If Treasury issues tokenized treasuries.
Yeah, no, we need to talk about this. Now that I remember. Yeah, that was a major point in that podcast. Then what does the Fed have to actually do?
Well, basically it's an upgrade to FedWire or a competitor to FedWire, right?
Exactly.
And one of the challenges that the Fed has had is for whatever reason, whether it's just inertia or the phrase in technology is security by obscurity. Or by obsolescence, rather, right? You basically just, you have COBOL on, a lot of these big banks literally have COBOL still in their tech stacks, right? So I don't know if that's true of the Fed. I don't know, but but that's kind of the point, right? That if nobody's hacking COBOL is the point because the 20-somethings don't know how to do it, right?
Are there any COBOL? I mean, is there anybody left on the planet other than maybe an AI that can actually program in
Well,
COBOL?
this
Those
is
guys
so
are dead.
interesting because before AI, a lot of the big banks were actually trying to go find retired COBOL programmers.
Right, exactly.
Right?
I know. I
Right.
mean, I've had this conversation with people like, so COBOL, Fortran, and machine language,
Yeah.
those guys are all dead, you know?
Yeah,
And,
well, but it's still in these tech stacks, and the banks are too afraid. It's not just banks, but obviously banks are a big part of historical tech debt,
yeah,
and part of the issue is that the payment systems, and they're running on 1970s technology. Fed
yes, they
now, of
are.
course, is not 1970s technology, but FedWire and ACH definitely, and they
Right.
haven't really been upgraded, right? So there's a clash coming in that regard as well,
Hmm.
because as somebody who's dealt with this, trying to build the middleware to bridge that 1970s technology to modern API based, cloud based, real time gross settlement type
Hmm.
payment rails.
Right.
Wow, right? And Treasury understands all that, and so the who's going to bridge that gap, and is Treasury going to step in? And that's kind of like it hasn't happened yet. I'm not surprised that it hasn't happened yet, but it's the kind of thing that you can bet that those conversations are happening behind closed doors.
Yes.
And it's kind of a threat, right? It's kind of a sword of Damocles. If you don't get your act together and you don't stop being insular
Hmm.
and stop trying to kill the crypto industry, then it's a pretty easy way to
We're
take
gonna.
that part away from the Fed by just basically tokenizing treasuries. And one of the interesting things that has happened is the SEC in the last couple of weeks has come out and given the DTC, the Depository Trust Company,
Hmm.
the ability to tokenize securities. Stop and think about that. If you're issuing, we got to talk about the root of this, because tokenizing an analog, when people register corporations, they're registering them in a PDF. It's a form fill, right? You can create a
Right.
PDF from a form fill, but it's not natively digital. And
Right.
unless you have an API call to the Secretary of State of Delaware, or now Texas or Nevada or Wyoming, the big states where corporations register, if anybody has an API call directly to them, then you can natively digitally register a corporation. However, that doesn't exist because the states haven't upgraded yet. And so what you're really doing is creating a token against analog data. That's not really a token, right?
No.
It's basically a claim on the analog data is what it is.
Hmm.
But if we can get natively digital securities, which means natively digital corporate registrations at the Secretary of State, where there's an API call to verify that when you're buying the share of stock, that is a validly issued share of stock, as opposed to one of these rehypothecated claims, all of a sudden that changes the game. And the SEC took a big step towards that. Now,
Wow.
what's
Yeah.
the
Yeah. Yeah.
impact of that on US dollars? You can't realize the benefit of cleaning up the stock system, which is we've talked about this in the past. There's all kinds of fraud and just inefficiency and inaccuracy in stock ledgers. Why?
Right.
Because there's a settlement delay, right? We're still at we're at T+1 now, but I mean, we have the technology to make it real-time gross settlement, and to
Right.
have the dollar leg and the securities legs settle atomically. We have the technology to do it. We're just not doing it. Why? Because the balance sheets are too leveraged and everybody's really afraid to actually move to that system. And there are too many people who figured out how to arbitrage it and make too much money off it. And so they're fighting tooth and nail against the upgrades. I've talked about this before. Before
Mm.
I came back to my native Wyoming, I was working with a startup called Symbiont that worked with the state of Delaware on the Delaware Blockchain Initiative. And we worked with the Delaware Secretary of State's office. I went with the Deputy Delaware Secretary of State to the SEC and had an interesting conversation where Delaware was talking about how many times they have discovered that a publicly traded company listed more shares in its 10K as being issued and outstanding than were validly registered in Delaware. Okay. And it often comes out because the database is never connected, right? And it often came out that those discrepancies arose during corporate proxy battles. And there's a famous speech by a Delaware Chancery Court judge, Travis Laster, that
Mm.
talked about how if a corporate proxy battle is within 10 percentage points, that you don't really know who won, because the stock ledger systems in the United States are so antiquated, and they're just constantly trying to catch up. And so if it's outside of 10%, you pretty much know who won. But if it's inside of 10%, you don't really know who won. Okay, and the Procter and Gamble one is a good example of no one really knows who won, right? They just agreed to sort of stop fighting a few years back. But the point is, like, all right, so the SEC is onto this. They're going to clean up the muck in the securities industry, which absolutely needs to be cleaned up. And yet now come back to the payment piece. If you have tokenized shares, which we're heading towards, how do you deal with the fact that the dollar leg isn't tokenized? The answer is you got to tokenize the dollar leg, and you've got to be able to do it in very, very, very large value. Not talking volume of payments, value. What is the high value payment system in the United States? Fedwire. Okay, so if you can start tokenizing treasuries, right? And we're seeing asset managers tokenizing treasuries already. What if the Treasury tokenized treasuries? That's effectively a tokenized US dollar payment system, isn't it? Ding, 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 ding.
Yeah, and we don't need the Fed.
Well,
that's what you're implying.
To be fair, this was not my idea. When I heard the idea, of course, all the puzzle pieces fell into place.
Right. And I'm just trying to make sure that for the listener that they understand where you're going with this, and I make sure that I understand where you're going with this, because I remember the last time you and I spoke, and you were going through all of this stuff, and I remember flat out, and you asked me, "What do you think about all that?" And I said, "I don't honestly know." And it was the first time I've ever actually sat in a podcast with someone where I could not keep up with the rate at which they were throwing information at me. Now, to be fair, and that's to your credit, by the way, and to be fair, I was like, okay, I don't know what she just said. But when I went back and listened to the podcast to edit it, to put it out, I'm like, oh my God, what she just said was the most fucking brilliant thing. I literally said this in my office.
But it's Besant. It's not me. It's Besant.
No. I know that. But you went through the last time. I'm just giving you an understanding of sometimes, there's a lot of information coming out in a fire hose here. And I do it when I'm doing a podcast. You're doing it here to me, which is fine. I love it. I adore it. It's just sometimes, you actually have to sit back, and sometimes you do have to listen to this information 2 or 3 or 4 times to finally have it go, that's I like, that's
but it fits into the puzzle piece.
Right.
Coming back to what we were talking about before, the tangent on securities and corporate registration, it fits into the puzzle piece of the clash between the Fed and Treasury, because that is a sort of Damocles that Besant, let's put it this way, if I heard it, others heard it too,
of
right?
Course.
So the fact that technology exists, that they don't need to go spend 10 years building an IT system, and they could literally do it tomorrow. What kind of pressure is that putting on the traditional system to get its act together and upgrade and get with the program? Yeah.
Well, again, this gets down to that again, think about what I've been saying about the need for Fed. We clearly need reform of the Fed. We're now on the cusp of it actually happening. And then we have to ask ourselves, well, what is the role of the Fed going forward? And, in conception, I've always just been saying, well, they should be there to backstop the domestic economy, the liquidity of the domestic economy, either in the form of, backstopping the commercial paper market in its original form, or whatever. The internal value of the liquidity of the system domestically, the domestic dollar markets, while at the same time putting up a firewall around the offshore dollar markets and letting them fend for themselves. And if they do need to come to the Fed, they should pay a premium for that, or as Vince and I have termed it, put a market access charge on it. It's an ATM fee. It's whatever you want to call it. But at the end of the day, you're paying 25 to 50 basis points over what Americans are paying for, because you are not Americans and you want dollars. Piss off. And that's just the way it's going to be. Yeah. And we have the ability, and the Fed can serve that role at the very least, as, again, this is all interim stuff as we move away from the old system or this existing system. You can't remove it from the system because the Fed's still there in case there are attacks on our financial system from abroad, because as we're doing this, it's of course going to invite the have we not noticed how much Europe has now turned around and said Russia's not their enemy, the United
I
States is
know,
their
right.
enemy?
Well, but let's get back to, we haven't talked about this
Yeah,
yet. The thing that made that I learned from you and you credited your hive mind is it's so amazing how, you can work in the financial market for years and not really think through. And a lot of, by the way, that's not an indictment of people who worked in or do work in the
of
financial
course not.
markets.
Of
It's
course not.
very narrow what most people's expertise is, and kind of
Of course.
zooming out and looking at the forest through the trees, stopping to think about how there was only one US bank that was in the LIBOR panel for
Right.
so long, right? Why were London banks setting the critical US dollar interest rate? You helped me see that. And the Fed itself, by moving over from SOFR, and you and I gave credit to them, to John Williams, by the way, who's been incredibly quiet in all this.
I guess he has.
Right?
And as the Fed, just to remind everybody, as president of the New York Fed, he is the actual vice chair of the FOMC.
Correct.
Which is different than the Federal Reserve Board. Those are two different things. The Federal Open Markets Committee is one thing; it's very powerful, and then there's the Federal Reserve Board. Even I get confused on that stuff every once in a while. Just to remind everybody, let's get back to brass tacks and proper definitions of everything. Go ahead.
Well, but SOFR brought U.S. control over U.S. interest rates and enabled what you're talking about,
Yes.
where they can say to the rest of the world, piss off, you have to pay more if you want dollars. I think was it William McChesney Martin who said the dollar is our currency, but it's your problem.
Yes.
Yes. Right. Yeah. Right. I mean, that's kind of, and for a while, Bernanke did, and crew, the sort of the globalist crew, didn't behave that way. Right. Because look at
they gave dollars to
2008.
everybody.
The vast majority of dollars of the expansion of the Fed's balance sheet in 2008 went to non-U.S. borrowers. Yeah,
absolutely. No, absolutely.
Yeah. And they were giving non-U.S. banks master accounts right and left. Like Adyen, which is a competitor to Stripe, has a master account, full-fledged master account, interest on reserves, all this. Stripe doesn't have one. How does that benefit the United States?
Clearly, it doesn't. And clearly, the way we used to put it internally and with Gold Against the Guns for years is that, when the Fed's at the zero bound, it ceases to be a central bank. It's just another Eurodollar pumper. I mean, it's no different than anything else. It's just the ultimate carry, and then we become the ultimate carry currency. So interestingly enough, the way I've been thinking about this stuff, like conceptually now, is what we're watching now is the process by which the United States gets control over its yield curve again. Because if you really have to go through 2008, 2008, and you think about what happened, I've done a complete 180 on what 2008 was all about. I don't know if you and I haven't spoken about this, but in the last 3 months, it's finally kind of gelled in my head as to what this is all about. So SOFR was the first attempt for us to get control of the short end of the yield curve, because that's what it does, right?
Brilliant.
Now,
Absolutely
on the other
brilliant.
side, now the other angle on that is that the Japanese Bank of Japan, the Japanese yen carry trade, is another attempt to have foreign control over the short end of our yield curve, because the Japanese yen is a source of cheap borrowing, get dollars and do the thing, right? Okay. So now the Japanese are normalizing interest rates.
Yes, and by the way, that correlates very strongly to gold. But I digress.
We'll get there, and I want to hear that. But now let's talk about what did we actually lose in 2008? Why did we bail out AIG over and over and over again? London-based AIG, as opposed to letting it go broke.
Well, and
broken up into 17 different,
where rehypothecation was literally infinite. Right.
So why was AIG bailed out, and why was Lehman Brothers destroyed? If you go through the timeline, I had to go through this like literally chapter and verse and go back through the timeline and look up the day in which which things started to go bad. Then they nationalized Fannie and Freddie. Then this happened. Then that happened. And I went, oh, in this order on these dates, the goal was Fannie and Freddie.
Oh, well,
2008 was all about the nationalization of Fannie and Freddie in order to then create Obamacare later on, because what they wanted was the control over the long end of the yield curve. And that's what Fannie and Freddie traditionally did in the market. They bought and sold, made a market, and mortgage-backed securities to control the long end of the yield curve. So you get rid of the short end of the yield curve. They have control over that. Now they have control of the long end of the yield curve, and they, in this case, is fucking London.
Yeah, it's London. Right. But remember, Operation Twist was later, though.
Yeah,
And
well,
there's
then
another
and
piece.
then they gave it all, and then they did all that to pay for Obamacare. But the point of Fannie and Freddie was to put them in conservatorship and take them out of that market, so they
Yes,
couldn't make
well,
a market in mortgage-backed securities. And then they
that's
gave us
clear.
Dodd-Frank with all the insane fucking um hoops that small business owners have to go through to get a fucking mortgage, and the
Yeah.
mortgage terms and everything else. If you look at our mortgage terms today, they're no different than they are everywhere else. The 30-year fixed rate mortgage that was the engine of the growth of the middle class in the
Of the
United
middle
States
class. Yeah, you've made that point.
it was
Yeah.
destroyed when Fannie and Freddie were nationalized and basically
Yeah.
turned over to the real Manchurian candidate. But he wasn't a Manchurian candidate. He was London's candidate. He was Obama.
Obama,
Obama
yeah.
was the
Yeah.
Manchurian candidate,
Yeah.
folks.
Yeah. He's a
I'm like,
globalist, right?
and so there it is. I'm looking at it all now, going, oh, so that's why they shut the government down back in November. They did, because Trump was planning on
Right. It
friggin'
was over Obamacare. Yeah.
well, not just Obamacare, it was over Fannie and Freddie. They're still bombing Fannie and Freddie. They're still trying to fight
Uh,
this every day. The most popular arguments on FinTwit today are people arguing over the senior preferred shares and the junior preferred shares and how to deal with all that shit over
right.
Fannie and Freddie. When at the end of the day, Trump can turn around and go, "I'm canceling them all. Whatever's left, we're just going to pay the coupons on, and we're not converting them to common because 95% of them aren't convertible to common anyway,
Yeah.
and it can
Okay.
all be
That's
dealt with."
interesting.
Oh
There's
yeah,
another
no,
angle though that I want to throw out at you because it's
sure,
not consistent with your view
okay.
of 2008, which is, and I can't recall if you and I've talked about this before, but Hank Paulson's book
Mm.
was it included an incredible revelation that Bloomberg then interviewed him about after his book came out, and he walked back. But it's in his book
Mm.
that during the Beijing Olympics in 2008, and I have very vivid memories of all that because remember that was sort of China's coming out, right?
Mm-hmm. Yes. Okay. Yes.
And just the jingoism and the strength that China was portraying back then. It was, we have arrived and we are a competitor to the United States, and look at all this incredible technology that we're bringing and all that, right? Okay, so Paulson, who was the Treasury Secretary under Bush, he disclosed that he went to George W. Bush, in Beijing, that his counterpart had told him that Russia had visited China to propose an attack on Fannie and Freddie by Russia dumping all their mortgage-backed securities. And that because of all the bugging that they assumed was taking place while Bush was in China, Paulson did not feel comfortable even telling Bush about this until they got on the airplane to come back home from the Beijing Olympics, because he just assumed that it was all bugged. Now, what was fascinating is when that book came out, I was still working at Morgan Stanley, and there was just a kind of like a lunch and learn group of women, and I brought that story up, and a mortgage-backed securities trader said, that makes something make sense. And I'm like, tell me. And she said, all of a sudden, in the dog days of summer, in the first 2 weeks of like end of July, the Olympics were at the end of July 2008. Mm-hmm. And then in the following 2 weeks, Russia, the Bank of Russia, called up every desk on Wall Street and started dumping their mortgage-backed securities, needed to sell those mortgage-backed securities at any price, just move them. I don't care how much the market moves. And people acknowledged at the time it didn't make sense because you'd never trade that way if you were trying to maximize financial returns. That was an attack on the United States. And what was fascinating was that China did not play ball with Russia and told the United States about it. So Bush and Paulson knew that it was coming. Now, when Bloomberg interviewed Paulson about this after the fact, Paulson just almost kind of portrayed it as if he wished he hadn't told the story. I actually tried to FOIA documents from Paulson's Treasury to try to figure out what actually happened there, because obviously there was a lot of movement, and that was a very material piece of 2008. But it's consistent with what you're saying, that they were going after Fannie and Freddie. But what was interesting is that it was Russia that was doing it, and in those illiquid markets, they were able to basically cause spreads to gap out.
No, actually, I want you to think about this really carefully, because what else happened in 2008? Now we have Georgia. Now we have South Ossetia. Now we have the Russians moving in at the same time. So all of that was an attempt to color revolution by the British and or the Americans to attack the underbelly of Russia. So of course the Russians are going to attack in the financial markets in a
So
That
interesting.
actually
Okay.
makes perfect sense to me. And then you ask yourself the question, why did we do that? When we
Why
knew
did we
why
try
did
to
all why was
destabilize Russia?
why did Chatham House and GCHQ and the special, why did all that happen when we knew that we were going to get a financial, and then I mean, you could set
Did
a
we know
series of
that? I don't know.
you could set a series of dominoes in motion here, especially after the repo crisis of 2007, which turns
Yeah.
into the vaporization of Bear Stearns in March, knowing full well that something was coming down the pike after that. And then that summer, their goal was to put Obama in the White House, and they had to do so in such a way that we had to get to that state. How do you get to that state?
Well, they created a financial crisis. And what was interesting is Russia thought, because back then China was a heavy investor in not just treasuries, but also mortgage backed securities.
Yes.
And if you looked at who owned a lot of the Fannie and Freddie paper, it was the central banks of Russia and China, and of course, others as well. But Russia didn't think they were big enough on their own, apparently, because they approached China allegedly, according to Hank Paulson, to create a coordinated attack. And China actually, if you go back and look at the foreign exchange rate, China fixed the yuan dollar rate in order to help the United States at that point. So clearly they were not on board with what Russia was trying to do. But what was interesting is that Russia, that just dumping into illiquid markets and causing spreads to gap out of not just Fannie and Freddie paper, but private mortgage-backed securities as well. Sure. They were really trying to, to foment a financial crisis, and it turned out Russia was big enough to do it on its own.
Yeah, well, because that tells you how bad how terrible those markets were,
how unstable those markets were. Yeah,
absolutely. Which validates everything that Michael Burry was saying about all his CDS trades and all that stuff that's in The Big Short and all that stuff. But that's a really interesting part of that, and I think geopolitically, it makes
read his book.
Sense. Yeah, because now 2008 and 2007 are really important years, because remember, you have Putin goes to the Munich Security Conference in 2007 and lays down the freaking law that if you people continue the way you're going, there's going to be a problem. And then within a year, he then turns around and has the Bank of Russia, pull the plug on our mortgage markets because they can see what's coming. That we're giving every unemployed dude in America a friggin' $500,000 jumbo loan.
Right.
No docs, no ninjas, all these ninja loans. I'm like, if I'm Putin, I'm like,
right.
This seems obvious to me. Why don't we knock these people in the teeth?
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
That's so interesting.
I would, if I were Putin, this is exactly the way I would do it. Like, I don't want to kill anybody, but we'll attack them where they're weakest. They have run this system as hard as they can for as long as they can. And he's always said, and Putin, to his credit, has always said the U.S., and he likes to use the U.S. for this because obviously, but he knows it's as much London as it is anything else. They use the dollar as a weapon.
Well, of course, the U.S. uses the dollar as a weapon, right?
So,
and
he's
not a fan of that.
Like just lay all of that stuff out. So, no, I think that's. I'm not trying to defend Putin or anything, but if I were him, that's what I would have done.
Go read his book now, because it'll be interesting for you to pick up based on what you're talking about and what you're learning, and how Fannie and Freddie were a part of that.
And then at the end of the day, what's the first thing they do is they nationalize Fannie and Freddie.
Correct.
There was literally no, I could see it as they nationalized Fannie and Freddie as a means by which to stop the attack on the external attack on the United States. But then you have to ask yourself, why did we engender that attack by doing the things that we were doing with Saakashvili in Georgia and South Ossetia and all of these things? Because remember, 2008 was a big coming out party for the Russian military to finally stop the bleeding and say, China. That's enough.
Right. Yes. Right, but that was coinciding with China's entry to the world. For those who are, because you and I are of a certain age,
the Chinese were very unhappy with Putin at that moment.
I'm sure they were, right? Sure. But you and I remember just how jingoistic that was. I mean, that Olympic opening ceremony in July 2008 just shocked the world. Wow, and
I had no idea we were going to cover this stuff today. This is really cool.
Right. Well, because it's so interesting, because that's where I got really curious. People have asked me kind of my Bitcoin origination story, and it goes back to 2008. I was working on the trading floor at Morgan Stanley, trying to put puzzle pieces together because things didn't make sense to me. It was Paulson giving an interview saying that, it was Geithner at that time giving an interview saying that interest rates were too low. And then after the financial crisis, criticizing the Fed for holding interest rates too high. And it was he contradicted himself within like a 2-week period of time, right? And Geithner, for those who don't know, was Obama. Was he Clinton or Obama's Treasury Secretary?
He was Obama's secretary.
He was Obama's. Okay.
He was at the Fed at the time. He was at the Fed, and then he was moved over to Treasury.
Okay, I don't know all that.
I think Geithner was at the Fed, and that's why that was his. He had the resume for it.
Right, we certainly have the resume for it, but he contradicted himself. It was on a Charlie Rose show, and I remember at that time thinking, "This makes no sense. I've got to really dig in." And it's so interesting because, working on Wall Street, everybody's in, heads down in their little zone, in their specialty. Sure. And a lot of people just don't pop their head up. And also it's, the Wall Street jobs are so lucrative that people don't want to pop their head up and don't want to lose them. I had a very unusual Wall Street career. I did 5 different jobs.
Right.
And started 3 new businesses in 22 years. Because I just kept getting bored. But that meant I just was curious and just kept, I was asking the deep questions. But I had access. That's what's so interesting. I had access, and being able to have a mortgage-backed securities trader who was a junior person, so therefore working in the first 2 weeks of August, and had to deal with the Bank of Russia, like calling to dump their mortgage-backed securities at any price, and it made no sense to her. And then you realize, like, this fits into a bigger puzzle piece. That it was designed to try to force the United States to nationalize Fannie and Freddie, and that's exactly what happened. And here we are, all these years later.
And we're still dealing with that problem. And the net effect of it is, between Dodd-Frank and Sarbanes-Oxley and everything else that's happened since then, we haven't really been in control of. We had the middle class the middle class's access to wealth was nationalized. Obamacare destroyed our ability to have health care and predictability, and raise costs on us unbelievably. Zero amount interest rates were just nothing but a pump for unbelievable inflation and things like insurance costs, cost of college, all of this stuff, housing costs, everything else. Yeah. And then, of course, we don't even have access to the fixed rate 30-year mortgage, which literally created the middle class, and helped create the modern middle class.
Your point is very well taken, and that's why Bessent is so focused on mortgage rates, and that's a strategy for the midterm for him, right? Is get interest rates down. Period. Full stop.
Well, so now let's go back. Let's go back to what I teased earlier about Japan, because it is my prediction for this year that by the time we exit 2026, the United States and Japan will be within a quarter point of each other.
Okay, do tell, because I have not paid that much attention to Japan, although I noticed that Bessent and his counterpart in Japan are meeting an awful lot.
Yeah, Bessent had. I'm sure that at the IMF conference back in October, that Bessent told Ueda over at the BOJ, "You will start raising interest rates again," and that's just the way things are going to be. Don't worry about the yen. We'll take care of you. The point being is, okay. So there's a couple of things I want to note about this. The reason is that you have to do away with the yen carry trade. You have to force the carry trade onto some other currency, onto some other central bank. Because why did they build the bank? Why did we build Japan? Go back to Richard Warner's Princess of the Yen. Why was Japan rebuilt after World War II, turned into this massive industrial entity? It was in order to be able to use the Bank of Japan as a source of cheap Eurodollar leverage, and build the Ponzi.
That's so interesting.
Build the Ponzi scheme now. And then we leave them there as the ultimate carry currency, with the massive capacity of the Japanese economy as the 3rd or 4th largest economy in the world to be able to fund the size of the carry trade necessary to basically keep the welfare queens in Europe afloat.
Oh, wow. I've never thought of it that way. Right.
Now, Powell goes on his higher for longer. We have SOFR. Yes. He says, the United States economy can handle 5.5% interest rates. Can you? No, you obviously can't. But the Bank of Japan is slowly having to unwind this. This is why when Kuroda walked away in December of 2022, I was confused. I was like, okay, it's time, Kuroda's time. Okay, we'll just meet the new boss, same as the old boss. But then his protege declined to take the job.
Right. Yes, I remember that.
And
Okay,
yeah,
what's the
I mean, I've
significance?
talked, and I remember talking, I've talked about this. And I was like, that's weird. This is Japan. Seniority is everything, saving face, and it's all very important, right? Everybody has their place, and everything happens in a certain order. And he said, nope. I was an architect of the old system of low interest rate policies and QQE and everything else. And for the good of the country, I'm going to step aside because I can't be impartial. And then we get
Mm,
Cosmo that no one was expecting. And Ueda doesn't immediately start raising interest rates. He just like widens the band that he allows the 10-year to start trading in
right.
and all of that. And then in August of 2024, we get the big tantrum where he raises up to a quarter point. And then we get a massive equity unwind. And then he lets it be for 6 months. And then he raises again when Trump is inaugurated in January, and nothing again. The yen carry trade unwinds a lot during the tariff tantrum.
For sure. Right.
Now, but that had nothing to do with the Bank of Japan. The Bank of Japan did nothing during all of that. But it was clear that someone, and I think I think the Bank of England, the Bank of Canada were running an operation, and so they were having to unwind yen positions in order to get all that done. And that's because you watched the yen, our you watched our the long end of our yield curve move about 60 basis points to the upside, and the Japanese yield curve dropped by 80 basis points to the downside. So we just watched this game play. And then he raises again and nothing happens this time. So he's at 75 basis points now. Clearly, the long end of the yield curve is rising in Japan because it needs to cover, to finally get to the point where it can cover inflation. And we're bringing the interest rates down slowly. So, but what happened in 2025? In the first half of 2025, Bessent, Trump run a weak dollar, we're buying gold policy, we're breaking the LBMA.
Yep. Oh, well, and today I saw a wonderful Franklin meme today. Franklin goes to the LBMA and discovers the vaults are empty.
Yeah, the vaults are empty, right? So for the first half so that goes on until literally the weakening of the dollar versus the euro. So the euro dollar cross is strengthening, versus the euro up until literally to the day that Ursula von der Leyen goes and supplicates herself in front of Trump at his castle in Scotland on British soil.
Yeah, right.
And says, I will cut the trade deal with you. Immediately, the euro dollar trades on a very, very tight band for the rest of the year. But the euro yen cross keeps strengthening. And the euro yen keeps strengthening. So we just shifted from the euro dollar cross to the euro yen cross.
Okay, now I see where you're going.
That's that's
pressuring Europe.
So they're keeping the pressure on the Europeans by squeezing them out of the yen carry trade slowly but surely. So over the course of this year, I expect Ueda to keep raising rates. They'll probably start to accelerate. Maybe not every meeting, but every other meeting. I expect the Japan to be close to 2% at the end of the year, and I expect us to be somewhere around 2% by the end of the year.
The correlation that I alluded to earlier that you said you'd ask me about is about gold.
By the way, the Swiss National Bank is back. Oh, sorry. The one last thing. And the Swiss National Bank is already back at the zero bound. Who's going to become the carry trader of choice? Is it going to be the Bank of England? Is it going to be the Bank of Canada? Who can handle this? Bank of England can't handle it. If silver's $150 an ounce and gold is 6,000, the Bank of Canada clearly can't handle it with market. Who's going to take that on?
But Switzerland is too small an economy to do that.
Exactly.
Right.
So there's no capacity. What I'm getting at is that the old carry trading system, who's going to become that? Is it going to be the ECB? Are they going to have to go back to the zero bound?
What do you think?
I don't know.
Is that where Bessett's forcing them?
Or is that where Bessent is forcing them? Exactly.
Yeah.
And if that's the case, it's going to be that at that point, then all that capital flees Europe.
Well, just going back to the very high correlation between the Japanese 30-year rate and gold, just incredibly high correlation, right? And I think Bessent made a very important. He gave us a tell early on about gold. I mean, he's been consistent about gold for years, right? But unlike other U.S. Treasury secretaries that did not want gold and silver to rise in price because they viewed that as a scorecard on the dollar, Bessent never said anything like that. He's happy to let it. I mean, I think you already know this, but because of the revaluation of gold that has taken place, that actually gold is the number one reserve currency in the world right now.
It is. And
Right?
what have I been saying what have I been saying for a long time?
Gold
What's
backed
going to
bonds.
bake your note? What's going to bake your not just that, but what's going to bake your noodle is the day that the Fed, when the Fed allows and welcomes a rising gold price. Why? To offset the leverage of its balance sheet, of its real assets versus its
Right.
fake assets, its overvalued assets. So it's got all these treasuries that are on the market that have bought it at like 1%.
Right. Huge
All these
mark-to-market
mortgage-backed
losses.
securities that
Yeah.
are unmarketable. So
Yeah.
like, so you've got this massive notional value of the Fed's balance sheet. Well, right now at $4,500 an ounce, our gold reserves, our official gold reserves, are on.
Right. If they're there.
Are
Right.
there? Yeah. Well, no, official gold reserves. No, they're there. The question is whether they're bigger than that or not. Brent Johnson and I are both convinced that the United States has more than 133.5 tons of gold.
Oh, interesting.
Oh,
I have
absolutely.
not heard you say that. Okay.
Oh, yeah.
Why?
I
What
am.
makes you
I
convinced?
just think that's the way we were buying gold left and right, and we have unofficial reserves, and they're on the balance sheet of like GLD and other places where we're storing
That's
that
true.
gold.
They're inside the United States, even if they're not officially on the Fed's balance sheet.
Right.
I gotcha. Yeah.
So that all that LBMA gold that we took in last year,
Right.
that's now on GLD's balance sheet, which is not going anywhere
Right.
because JP Morgan is the sole custodian, and JP Morgan has to call the Treasury Department up and go, India wants 300 tons of gold. Do we give it to them? No. Sell them, make them liquidate their GLD shares for dollars. Fuck off. No, you can't have them. It's just the way it's going to be. Same thing with silver, by the way.
Oh, silver. Isn't that crazy? It's what, 91 right now?
93, something like that. It's insane. But
oh, wow. Okay.
So when you think of it that way, like all I've ever been saying is that at some point the Fed's balance sheet, the leverage of the Fed's balance, and I wasn't thinking when I originally put this model together, I never said, I always thought, well, the Fed will still be there. But now we're talking about the Treasury taking over control of a lot of the Fed's. And if we were talking about,
but that doesn't change. The Fed's still going to be there.
Right. Exactly.
Yeah.
So at some point, the leverage ratio of the assets that the Fed actually has versus its total balance sheet, that's where we're going to find out where the price of gold is going to go to. At some point that's where the free market comes in and says, we will decide what that leverage ratio is. Will it be 1-to-1, 2-to-1, 3-to-1, 4-to-1? It was like 11-to-1 when I first started talking about this. Now it's like 6-to-1. It's like $1.5 trillion versus $6.3 trillion or whatever it is. So it's like 5-to-1 or whatever. I think we get that. We might get to a very Jim Sinclair 1-to-1.
Well, what would the gold price be at that point? 50,000?
Well north of $40,000 an ounce. I think it's going to be somewhere around 20. That's what I think. I also think $1 million Bitcoin and $400 silver for those exact reasons.
Right. Well, it's very clear. One thing that is absolutely true about 2025, aside from just the craziness of everything that's happened and sort of a lot of people talking about the fourth turning, real assets, gold, silver, non-oil commodities, and Bitcoin have rallied together. Right. Different, not on it every day, but directionally. Right. Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah.
Oh, yeah. And Bitcoin's breakout this week has been
massive,
hilarious because I've just been waiting for it. I'm like, oh, this is good. I don't know about anybody else, but I bought a little BITU a couple of weeks ago at $83,000. And I'm like, I like making 2x on my Bitcoin right now and then getting paid a monthly dividend. Like, this is my 401k.
Oh, that's interesting. Yeah.
Yeah. No, for me, I'm playing those bets.
That's interesting.
Let me put it to you this way. I checked the options for the first time in 12 to 14 years. I checked an options chain and I'm like, that's not liquid enough for me to play in that space.
Right.
I thought about it.
I don't trade around my positions, so I'm just literally
I don't either, but every once in a while I have to let people know what I actually own because hey, I this is what I do for a living, right? And so one of the things that we should talk about is okay, I make my bones very clear. I whatever I recommend is if I'm invested in anything, I'm invested in the things that I recommend to people. I don't whatever I have, and I mostly just have physical gold, silver, and Bitcoin. That's most of my worth. That and the equity in my home. I mean, why? I mean, look, I live off my cash flow. I'm still a middle class dude who clothes shops at Walmart. Like, let's not kid ourselves. So, I'm living in a freaking RV in the middle of nowhere, Tennessee.
Are you really? I was going to say this is not your normal background.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, you wouldn't have. We haven't talked since April. We only put this together in the last few months.
And the funny thing is, we've never met each other. A lot of people talk about how they love listening to our conversations, but we've never actually met each other.
one
in
of
all these
these days
years.
we're going to do that. And one of these days I'm just going to like get on a plane and fly to Wyoming and we're just going to like have coffee. And
Well,
I'm like,
come to Scaramucci's conference in August. It's going to be even more interesting, right? Because it's right before the Kansas City Fed
oh,
symposium.
wow. I
Right.
might have to. I actually have a travel schedule this year that actually isn't just like going like back and forth to Florida. I actually have a couple of places I'm going to be. I'm going to be in a couple of different places. I'm going to be in Calgary in March. I'm going to be in Atlanta in May. I'm going to be in New Hampshire in June for a Bitcoin thing, actually for Camp Nakamoto up in
Oh,
um, yeah, that's going to be fun. They invited me to come up there, so I got a couple of
nice.
things that I'm a couple of places I'm going to be this year, but and then I've got a couple of Rush concerts to go to as well on various places in the country. So, um,
Very good. Very
yeah,
good.
one must genuflect at the altar of Alex and Getty. So,
Oh wow. Okay.
yeah.
Right. I'm not doing as much travel. I've got a family member. I think you know this who's pretty ill. So I've cut way back on travel, and we'll see about
I'll just
how
have
that's
to
going
come
to
to you.
play out in
Actually,
2026. So
actually, we're going to be just so you know, and I don't care. I was like, we're going to go on vacation to the Southwest and for 2 weeks. So I may be in your neck of the
nice.
woods. I may
Yeah.
actually call it. I may
Well,
actually call
make a drive. The Utah national parks are amazing,
it.
and
Yeah.
especially if you catch Wyoming in the summertime, it's also
Mm.
spectacular,
Yeah.
absolutely spectacular. So to come
I,
across
I
I-80.
I have to say, I mean, we're still doing this now. I've been up here on the Cumberland Plateau, where we are up here is different and great and fascinating. And every time I drive down the main road that goes where we are, and I drive into the valley, I'm like, and just look out, I'm like, I missed this. I haven't seen this in so long because I've been living in flatland, flat
Right in
for
Florida.
yeah,
Yeah. Well,
alligator
that's
land.
where you raised your daughter, and yeah,
Oh yeah,
that,
absolutely. So it's been
that's
fun.
it's and it sounds like you haven't completely cut ties, but once
Oh no,
Tennessee
no, not
cut
at all.
interest or cut income taxes, a lot of folks
Oh
ended
no,
up there.
I love my Florida citizenship, and I will fight like hell to keep it for as long as I can. So yeah, and I will. So we'll
Well,
spend plenty
they
of time in
should
Florida.
they should step in and basically try to take over Delaware. I'm fascinated that no state has stepped in to try to do the Delaware natively register corporate securities on a blockchain
Mm,
trade, which what the registered agents, when I was working on this in 2015, I mentioned earlier that I went to the
right,
SEC with the Delaware Deputy Secretary of State and learned how many mistakes there are, and between
right,
the Delaware corporate registrations and SEC, 10K number of shares issued and outstanding. And what's fascinating is back then the whole idea, and it's still true today, although the incumbents were able to delay, right? I was working on that in 2015. Here it is 11 years later.
hmm
And oh, by the way, there's another piece of this that when my company at the time got access, because we were partnering with the Delaware Blockchain Initiative, we got access to the back end of the Delaware Secretary of State's website. There were multiple hackers sitting on the line. Okay, and when we when we disclosed this to the SEC, it was kind of a shoot the messenger kind of thing. Like the state of Delaware didn't want the world to figure out that it knew this, right?
right,
And how many people were getting advance information about mergers, right? And nobody seemed to care. So that means you ask the question like, oh dear, who's in on this,
right,
right? How is it
right.
that all these Congress people get, they walk in with no net wealth, and all of a
Walk
sudden
out with
Ilhan Omar is worth $30 million, right? I mean, I'm not saying she did all that, but it's just that there are mechanisms like that in the system that the old system, there were interests that didn't want it changed,
of
right?
course.
And so if you just go around the old system, you can clean up so much of that corruption.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And so I think the big thing we should be thinking about in terms of theme for the podcast is that no matter what the old system wants to hold on to, they're not going to. And
Oh,
clearly, that's
absolutely. The technology exists to fix it all. Yeah.
just in general. I mean, technology even comes in the form of people who refuse to accept the old system for what it was, and that gets back to what I
Yes.
said at the beginning of the podcast. it's clear what Trump is trying to do, and he's got a team in front of him that understands what's been done and what is now going to be undone. And last summer I said he's going to meet the King of England and he's going to issue terms of surrender, and the king clearly said no, or the king clearly said I can't say yes, which is not exactly the same thing depending on your point of view. He's going to Davos on like.
I think this is going to be great. Grab the popcorn. And he's flipping off,
my
his
God,
hecklers.
my poor liver. If I have to take a drink every time he says something inflammatory, but when he went to the UN and brought both bags of poop and the shotgun, was like, that's one thing. Now he's going to Davos.
He's going to Davos. Yeah.
And there's gonna be Stephen Miller's gonna be walking in with a tray and just going pull over and over again and all over the crowd. It's gonna be hilarious. Set it all on fire.
And I saw he called Elizabeth Warren. I thought that was hilarious. He picked up the phone and called her. And they apparently they're doing, they're trying to, because he's targeting the credit card interest rates. He wants credit card interest rates down. And so he's sort of jawboning them down, right? And he's like, all right, he'll partner with her on that.
Right.
How funny is that? Right. That was not on my bingo card.
Trump is an old school populist. And really, at the end of the day, he's more a Democrat than he is a traditional Republican. He's a Democrat in the more in the Kennedy sense than anything else.
Yeah.
And, that's fine. Like, I'm okay with that. So at the end of the day, like, he's not perfect, but he's clearly got his head at, in a particular mindset. And that mindset is we're done taking, spending the blood and treasure of the American people for the rest of the world.
Yeah.
And especially to Europe. He has to play with the Chinese. He wants to make nice with the Russians because he knows that they're the best antipode to the rise of China that they're possible.
For sure.
Without a doubt. And it would be the best for the Russians as well, because they don't have to be China's bitch.
Well, look at the commodity other than oil. Right, which is very specific because of the dynamic between Venezuela and Iran. Other than oil, commodities have just rallied. What country is that best for? Russia.
Yes.
Right? Because it's so natural resource rich. Kind of like the United States in that regard. Yeah.
And Canada. And that's why Canada is going to have to just, bite the bullet and learn to, stop putting, vowels at the end of every sentence. You got to start talking like Americans. Sorry, just coming. Sorry.
It was really funny. I saw a meme that circled a map of the world. It's like Trump's, Putin's, and Xi's, right? And it's just like you can kind of draw it that way.
Yeah, no, somebody did that, and they actually found that map, and then they attended it, and they wrote a big article. What's Tom Luongo's thesis? And I've been like, and it's really funny. It's on my Twitter feed. I'm like, yeah, that's kind of it, and it's drawn in crayon too. If it's about the world, it's drawn in red crayon.
That's probably where I saw it was on your Twitter feed, because when I'm trying to, I can't keep up with everything right now, and I wanted to I'll just scan your Twitter feed at least once a day, just to see your take on the events of the world, because it is hard to keep up with unless you're doing it full time, and you do it full time, and I don't know how you keep up.
I don't know how I keep up either. I do have a large group of people who feed me a lot of stuff every day. I can tell you that in the position that I'm in now, I have to remind myself. I don't like the new chat function in Twitter, because it doesn't actually give me all of my notifications, which is part of the reason why I haven't so I don't always see the notifications in Twitter, because I mostly interact with my Twitter feed through my notifications and my chats, right? I finally just checked for the first time since Christmas the request for DMs, and it was like 20 long. I'm like, oh my God, and having to go through all that. So if I miss something, if I don't get back to you in a DM on Twitter, it's simply because the thing's not giving me really good notification numbers. So don't feel slighted. I will always apologize for it. But yeah, I have just an insane number of people just throwing stuff at me all day long. I've now trained like a whole group of researchers.
Your hive mind, right?
Yeah, and it's great. And then I don't have to go and see the world. The world comes to me every day, and I go noise, signal, signal. And the signal to noise ratio from that is actually improving every day.
Well, I'm sure it's pretty high, right? And the crypto Twitter sphere is all upset at Elon for changing the algorithm and downplaying crypto, and there's all this conspiracy theory. I don't know if it's true that Elon is going to be introducing a payments platform, and that's why the conspiracy theory is that's not a conspiracy theory. We've known for a while that
Yeah, he
he
is.
was going
He's
to use
absolutely.
Twitter as a super app and
Mhm.
introducing payments. But what we haven't known is that the algorithm was going to be, designed allegedly to down
Downrank and whatnot.
prioritize, downrank. Thank you, the crypto people.
He also said in that, after the European Union demanded that they demanded X, Y, and Z about what he's doing to downrank and downvote
Mm-hmm.
people, all the rest of it. He's like, fine, I'll just make it. We're making the Twitter algorithm public knowledge.
I love that.
Yeah, no,
Right. And I think that's partly because of the criticism of our crew.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. I
Yeah.
think I think he's been saying it for a long time that he's going to make the algorithm open source so that everybody can see it. I absolutely, I've never doubted that he would eventually do it because Elon's just that kind of guy.
Yeah, he is. It's not about money to him. Yeah.
But not anymore. It really isn't. I mean, he's got enough, right? I saw something
Right.
else about Elon Musk recently. I read something. Now he lives in like a $50,000 trailer in West Texas or something. He actually doesn't have. He's like, I don't want no. The infrastructure is now it's too much of a liability. It actually just weighs you down. Having he's become very Keanu Reeves about things.
I love that.
Keanu Reeves takes public transportation and feeds the pigeons every day and all that stuff. He's just a normal dude that eventually goes out and makes another John Wick movie, right?
Yeah.
The same. Elon's like
Huge
hitting
Keanu
that
Reeves fan.
stride
Yeah.
in his middle age, which is actually good because he's so in effect, he's so volatile and unstable that he needs to do that and needs to simplify his life because then he makes better decisions.
Well, and I think that's obviously the case of that he is such a good. I think who was it that one of his big investors said he'd never seen until Steve Jobs, he'd never seen anyone who was that good at filtering out signal from noise until he met Elon. That
right.
He's just hyper focused on spending his time as a CEO on the things that really matter. And as somebody who is running a company, I can sympathize that that's one of the biggest challenges is all the noise that comes at you all day long. And how do you prioritize the things that are going to work? It's a challenge for sure.
It is a challenge. And this is part of the reason why when we evaluate the decision making of public figures, it doesn't matter whether they're good, whether we like them or we hate them. At the end of the day, a guy like Jerome Powell, do you really think that he knew exactly what was going on with the stupid renovations or any of that stuff? Of course he didn't. He's the FOMC chair, but he has to be the guy who's supposed to be in charge of that. He's the figurehead for it. We have to remind ourselves in this social media landscape that you want to be the guy with the big bucks, with the CEO after your name, or have the big job. With it comes a responsibility. It's like Trump gets blamed for shit that he has no control over, just like we all get blamed for stuff that we have no control over. In our lives. And it's just something we have to remind ourselves here and there to take a step back, evaluate them as people, and go, well, they're like us. They only have 24 hours in a day. They still put their pants on one leg at a time, and they still can only get so much information. And the way they get their information, I think, is as important as anything else. And what I've been impressed with so far in Trump 2.0 is that he's spending less time watching the television set and railing at Fox News.
That's clear.
And right. And doing doing the real work. And so he
became very focused for this second term. No question.
He has a much different demeanor. And for that reason alone, I'm willing to give him a very wide berth on things that he does that I may or may not agree with and in the moment. Because so far he has every time he's done that, and everybody's like lit their hair on fire. Israel, Iran, for example, right? Venezuela, for another example. In the end of the day, what did he wind up doing? He wound up giving them the war they wanted in Israel, Iran. 12 days. They beat the crap out of each other. Tying a lot of injuries. It looked like my fantasy of a Dallas Cowboys Philadelphia Eagles game. A tie and a lot of injuries. Because I'm a Giants fan. I was a Giants fan in the former life, right? And then Venezuela got rid of Maduro, took Maduro in, brought him into protective custody. That was necessary. Pressured everybody into, and then backed the existing regime in order to allow or a real to allow the Venezuela to come to the floor, right?
Yeah,
And so
yeah.
at the end of the day, so far he's you might not agree with his method, but can't really argue with the results. That's the way I look at it.
So let's close with what's your prediction? Who does he pick as Fed chair and when?
Did he not already nominate Hassett, or was that just fake news?
I don't think it, well, unless
I thought I
unless
saw.
something
I thought
happened
I saw
today.
that the same. I thought I saw that the same day that the Powell thing came out. But again, it may have been
No, no,
fake
no,
news. But
no, no, no,
lots of
no.
dumb shit goes on Twitter on a daily basis.
Yeah,
Okay,
yeah, yeah, yeah. No.
I don't
That's
know.
funny you didn't know that. No, no,
Yeah,
it's still the race is still on.
yeah, yeah.
So
It could be Hassett. It could be I don't know. I don't even, to be honest with you, I don't even care. I just know that it's going to be somebody that's going to do whatever Trump wants at this point. And what Trump wants at this point is 2% interest rates. He says he wants one, he'll take two. One is his Zopa, right? That's his Zopa offer, but he knows 2% is probably where it needs to be in the long run. And if he's got Fannie and Freddie back in the marketplace, he can control the long end of the yield curve and still keep the funds rate around 2% and then everybody's happy. And then, charge the offshore dollar markets, 3%.
right. Yeah.
That's all that matters. And if you can get
and recapitalize the Fed that way. Yeah.
And recapitalize it that way. Absolutely.
Yeah.
That's what I think.
Well, let's see. So you said this is going to be published on Sunday. Yeah. Yeah. Well, we'll see. I mean, he said he's going to do it in the month of January. So we're still in the month of January, but we're almost by the time this comes out, we'll be halfway through. So.
Oh yeah. This is the 14th. I'll probably come out in about 3 or 4 days. So we'll see what happens. Right. All right.
Well, as always, our meandering conversation went to places we didn't plan. And I love that we really didn't plan it. We talked before we started about just basic concepts. Yeah. And the moment we dove in, the plan went out the window. So as always.
Are you kidding? So where can people find you on Twitter? Do your plug. Let's get out the door.
At Caitlin Long _. And I'm on LinkedIn. Those are the only two social medias, and Noster.
Of course. And of course, Custodia Bank and the CEO of Custodia Bank and all of that. And, and I'm TFL 27. Sorry, I will do this right this time. Let's try that again. Shall I begin again? I am TFL 1728. Patreon /Gold Goats and Guns. Tom Luongo, Dada, me. You guys know the drill. You know how this works. Caitlin, thank you so much. We will not wait 8 more months to do this. Y'all be well.
You too.
Be good and keep your stick on the ice.